What makes a good story? It's a question with so many right answers, so perhaps the better question to ask is what makes it your story? How do you tell the story specifically tied to your characters or a pre-existing property? The reason I ask this question is because after reading the Metal Virus Saga, I couldn't help but ponder, what makes a good Sonic story? With so many characters, each with their own unique personalities and places in the world, how do you tell the same tale of good versus evil over and over again while making it a fresh experience every time? It's no secret that virtually the entire fanbase enjoys these IDW comics, but even so, as far as I'm concerned, they aren't getting the true recognition they deserve. If the Metal Virus Saga has taught me one thing, it's that Ian Flynn is willing and able to push the limits of Sonic storytelling, finding creative ways to tell ambitious stories by putting these characters in new, exciting circumstances. So, in this review essay, I'm not just here to relay the story to you, but provide insight from the narrative workings behind the fantastic character work, pacing, and overall writing of what is, in my opinion, one of the greatest stories ever told using the Sonic the Hedgehog mythos. So, without further ado, my name is Nicholas, but it's Nick for short, and let's dive into the apocalypse as I review the second arc of the IDW Sonic comic, the Metal Virus Saga. To begin, we have Sonic relaxing on a beach, recounting the new status quo post-defeating Metal Overlord. Amy's leading the restoration, Nux is guarding the Master Emerald, Silver is still searching for the foreshadowed cause of his future's devastation, and Tails is keeping busy by building things. But before our hero can get too comfortable, Tails arrives panicked with a letter from Mr. Tinker inviting him back to Windmill Village. Luckily, Sonic picks up on the more Eggman-esque tone of the note, which is right on the money, as if you'll remember from the last video, Eggman is already putting his newest plan into action with the assistance from his fierce admirer, Dr. Starline. Now at Windmill Village, Sonic and Tails find the Chief tied up, and after a swift rescue, they're filled in on how Eggman was captured an entire week ago. And right on cue, Rough and Tumble reveal themselves, sporting some new weaponry. As the duos begin to clash, Eggman is beginning the second phase of his experiments. The dastardly duo of Eggman and Starline are performing experiments on live plants, releasing a mutagen on them. Not only does this virus prove to be effective on animals, but the host proves capable of spreading it as well. With a few more test runs confirming the virus passing from flora to fauna, Eggman considers it to be a complete success. After a little bit of boasting, Starline and Eggman both view Sonic's battle through the warp topaz. As the fight continues, we get a couple cute character moments, but nothing to analyze yet. That said, the reason I stopped here is just a voice that I don't really like Rough and Tumble. In my opinion, they are simple, one-note goons with fine design, sure, but absolutely nothing interesting about their personalities. If they had a more unique power set, then maybe I could forgive it, but I'm just not a fan. Another great aspect is again the artwork by Bryce Thomas, who has solidified himself as one of my favorite artists to ever grace the Sonic series. Granted, I'm not entirely sure how much of the overall page composition is Flynn during the scripting process or Thomas as he draws, likely it's a combination of both, but the point I'm getting at is the composition is clean and concise with strong poses and layout. With Rough and Tumble decidedly defeated, Eggman and Starline are unsurprised yet disappointed. Eggman's admirer asks to move on to Test 6, which Eggman refutes the idea, seeing as he already knows that it works. Here is where the story begins to take pre-existing Sonic storytelling tropes and use them to its advantage. Eggman is the ultimate narcissist. He loves showboating, never taking precautions to foolproof his plans. Now Ian Flynn is contrasting that beautifully with Starline's meticulous nature. In doing so, it brings forth Eggman's defining flaws to give more depth to the titular Doctor and the newly introduced Starline. The henchmen are teleported back to Eggman's lab, leaving Sonic and Tails in the village. One interesting interaction is how Tails brings forth the obvious that Eggman must be back. With Mr. Tinker's kidnapping and Rough and Tumble's new gear, that must be the case, of course. But what I find interesting is the fact that Sonic honestly seems frustrated. The expression conveys so much regret, doubt, and the slightest hope maybe it's not Eggman. I just find it a really nice character detail that shows that Sonic really does want the best for everyone, even his arch-nemesis. Sonic decides to go see if Silver has any intel on the situation, and as he's doing so, Starline inserts himself on Metal Sonic's next mission, so he too can have a shot at Sonic the Hedgehog. In the frozen peak, we find Sonic and Silver following a lead. Up ahead, they find the base being cleared out, but before they can put a stop to things, Metal Sonic appears, giving our heroes a thrashing. As Silver catches the robotic doppelganger, he loses his grip as Starline makes his dramatic entrance. We then cut to Eggman testing the limits of the metal virus, observing its rapid increase in effectiveness with greater exposure. His enthusiasm is soured when Rough and Tumble reappear eager to destroy Sonic. The mad scientist, annoyed, finds a good way to put them to use. As the fight continues in the mountains, Starline uses the Warp Topaz to throw our heroes off balance, but Sonic manages to pin him down. Starline gives the heroes access to the base's vault, or so he claims. As Silver heads into the base, it's revealed the base has been rigged to blow. As Sonic rushes in, the base erupts. For all intents and purposes, Sonic looks defeated from the villain's perspective, prompting a furious reaction from Eggman. This moment is what truly sold me on this arc whenever it comes to Eggman's character. Sure, his plan is super unique, but it's this deeper look into his psyche that I find really captivating. Eggman has done some truly evil, downright sinister things, but as far as his feelings towards Sonic are concerned, they've remained largely unexplored other than base hatred. So sure, he hates him, but with his level of intellect, even after he took over the world, the question became, why didn't he just kill Sonic? Well, it's explained here in one of my personal favorite Eggman moments throughout the entire franchise. His cruelty and want to destroy Sonic on a fundamental level adds all the context we need as to why he does not simply kill him. It's just overall a great moment for his character. This also presents a good time to talk about Starline in creating characters, specifically complementary ones. At first I wasn't sure how I felt about Starline as a character, but I've come to see just how well he works with Eggman. Much like colors in art, when it comes to creating characters in writing, there are several archetypes that complement each other, and one of the most common is carelessness versus meticulousness. In order to create a great complementary character, there are a few baseline rules to follow. Firstly, you have to give the characters some superficial characteristics in common, such as speed, intelligence, etc. Secondly, you gotta give them something to set them apart that challenges the beliefs of one another. And maybe most importantly of all is to give them some kind of aligning motivation that puts them into situations together in which they respond differently, thus creating conflict to inspire change no matter how large or small. And as we'll see going forward, that is exactly the growth Starline goes through over the course of this arc, and it makes him such a truly compelling character for the Sonic mythos. But I'm getting ahead of myself, let's get back on track with the story. Of course, Sonic and Silver survive in a psychokinetic shield, putting the true strength of Sonic and his companions in perspective for Starline. Back at Resistance HQ, Silver is resting up from exerting so much power. Amy, after being filled in, deduces that the best plan of action is to head to an old, unguarded Eggman base, hack into his systems, and find the Mad Doctor that way. At Echo Mine, Sonic and Amy arrive and dive into the rocky depths. A cool piece of world building is how the Resistance had a huge battle in the canyon, and I like the fact that we're still learning about things like this. It makes the world feel more alive when the main cast isn't on screen. I'll elaborate on it later, but the world building in this arc is incredible, but as I said, I'll get onto that later. Once our heroes have access to Eggnet via the abandoned base, Starline rushes to warn Eggman, who simply says to appreciate these dramatic deadlines, as he sends his henchmen to do his bidding with backup weapons just in case. Amy finds the most recent files on a brand new ship specialized in payload distribution. Before they can continue on though, a massive drill bursts through the computer with our heroes narrowly dodging the assault. As the machine presses on, Sonic and Amy devise a plan to sink the machine into a large pit. After swiftly dismantling the machine, the dastardly duo use Eggman's backup weapons only to find metallic sludge enveloping them. As Sonic tries to use his wit to get under their skin, he finds their lack of response unsettling. It's almost as if they're acting like zombie robots, thus dubbing them Zombots. Sonic leaps over Tumble to see that the virus has spread to him, warning Amy not to make contact. Amy swings her hammer into Ruff, but to no avail, as he's virtually indestructible. Sonic quickly attacks Ruff and Tumble, launching them into the pit below. With Eggman having witnessed the whole battle, he and Starline come to a consensus. It's time to spread this virus to the world. This right here is where the story truly begins. But before we move on, I want to briefly talk about what a fantastic move it was to infect Sonic with the Metal Virus. Typically in a Sonic story, it's always very centered around something the kids will enjoy. Yes, there are stakes, but the implications of someone dying are incredibly rare to find, unless it's a one-off character. So to put Sonic in this position that makes him an immediate threat to everyone around him is incredibly interesting, and as we will soon see, really affects his mental state. On the subject of Sonic's infection, we see Tangle arriving at Tails' workshop while Tails is running some tests on Sonic and discover that the blue blur can actually drive back the virus using his speed to run it off. Eggman, however, is steps ahead of the heroes. His spaceship is now airborne, using all 7 Chaos Emeralds to power the ship. As Eggman gives Starline the tour, the platypus asks some basic questions about commanding the Zombots, given the mass-produced nature to which Eggman replies it's a trade secret. This is some pretty clever foreshadowing for things to come. The first place to be doused with the Metal Virus is Windmeal Village. Back at Tails' lab, Sonic sees the infection reappear, proving that he can resist the virus, but running is no cure. As Sonic monologues to himself, he looks back on previous dire circumstances and he's always come out on top, but this time it's different, and it's funny because he kind of explains what makes this premise so great for me. As I said, most Sonic stories are a simple Eggman does something bad and Sonic shows up to stop it, but what makes this feel so different to me is the world around the characters. Ian Flynn went through a lot of trouble in the previous arc to establish a world. When Sonic isn't on screen, things are still happening, and it truly feels that way. Hence Eggman's plan having so much more oomph to it. There are a lot of reasons to tell a story from multiple perspectives, and the way it's used in this story is to build suspense, almost like a slasher. One of the most famous examples of this is in the movie Jaws. When the citizens are out swimming, if a shark were to suddenly attack, then sure, it's a shock, but not very impactful. However, by following the underwater perspective, it can create an intense sense of unease as you wait to see who it will strike. This story employs the same philosophy, which makes total sense given its horror inspiration. And looking back on the idea about what a fantastic idea it was to infect Sonic, I think it's clear as day. Sonic is always the hero on the front lines, but now he's in a position where he's the only one who can fight the Zombots. But in doing so, he could worsen the infection, and every second he's not running, he's inching closer to death. And that right there is the classic if you stop running, you blow up scenario brought to an extreme, and I absolutely adore it. The amount of depth both these classic bread and butter writing techniques combined with a fantastically unique premise for a Sonic story have made this one of the greatest preludes to any main story in the entire franchise. But now we enter the true apocalypse as we see a small bird flying towards a city. This is where I'd like to establish something I like to call the art of apocalyptic storytelling in order to lay the groundwork for storytelling techniques later on. There's a lot more to writing an apocalypse story specifically, but for this overview I want to focus on 2 points in particular. The importance of world building and perspective. And lucky for me, this next issue emphasizes the importance of each of those factors perfectly. At Seaside City, the Chaotix Detective Agency is being filled in on the dangers of the Metal Virus by Tails. Despite thinking they're likely out of harm's way, a Zombot bursts through the front door, prompting the team to retreat. As the city skyline comes into view, the Chaotix see Eggman's spaceship releasing the virus onto the city. The trio decide to head downtown and call Amy for backup, but she can't guarantee who or if anyone will show. This right here has already covered those 2 rules. The presence of multiple populated areas is retroactively making the war in Sonic forces feel far more important, in the world all the more real. And given the total lack of civilization found in Sonic stories over the last decade, seeing real citizens both from this arc and the last in new places, some even in old levels like the obvious Seaside Hill reference, make the world feel so much more alive, which is incredibly important whenever you're putting the entire world at risk. This is an aspect essential to telling a story with such a grand scale, and it's found in all of the greatest Sonic stories. In the Adventure series, although not fleshed out, at least seeing the people of Station Square and the planet at large adds so much more stakes to the plot, seeing all those lives on the line. Same for Unleashed, where the people often make the story itself because of how you build a connection with the settings and its people. This saga uses that very basic yet crucial aspect of storytelling to great effect because the world itself becomes infinitely more important in an apocalypse story when the world as we know it wouldn't be destroyed but forever cursed. Essentially, what it all boils down to is I love the fact that this arc is solidifying Sonic's world. It heavily reflects and emphasizes past events, specifically ones from Forces, as that was more or less the soft reboot of the mythos as a whole, seeing as everyone in Sonic's world is now an Anthro character. And I love the fact that we're getting to see how the world is still recovering from the events of Sonic Forces and how different characters are doing different things whenever Sonic isn't on screen. It makes the entire world feel so much more real and alive. It's because of the strong, concise world building that more than any other interpretation of the Sonic mythos before, this feels uniform. So much so that I can easily believe any of these people have their own independent lives off screen with so many more stories to tell. And because of that, I want to see the heroes do more than just stop Eggman because he's evil, I want them to save the world and its people. As for the second point about perspective, I think I'll hold off till a little later to talk about it. Back in the action, Vector sees the infection spreading and deduces that the best defensible position is to gather everyone at the docks. As the Chaotix save any survivors they can, Vector gets cornered, but luckily Sonic arrives for the save. After being filled in on the plan, Sonic rushes off to face the Zombots. Espio and Charmy are leading a group of the uninfected when someone in the crowd shouts. One of them is slowly turning metal. Espio and Charmy are unsure how to handle the situation as the woman pleads not to be left behind. Suddenly, a car is smashed next to her vertically. Despite her begging, Vector completes the cage and says he's sorry. Quickly retaking control of the situation, Vector leads the remaining citizens to the docks. Charmy protests against Vector leaving the infected behind, and the lead detective shouts and grits his teeth, justifying what he's done, even if he doesn't like it either. This issue as a whole actually really made me care about Vector as a character. I've never much cared for the Chaotix since so many Sonic characters have cool traits but no real personality, but seeing Vector as a true leader making the tough decisions because no one else can has given him depth that he's needed for so long in my opinion. Charmy being the youngest, I understand why he's the most unreasonable, even if it is a little annoying, but given his naive nature, I get that that's the point. Fortunately, it gives Espio a nice moment to show his level-headed maturity, further giving him solid characterization. As the rescue shuttle arrives, Sonic's infection is continued to spread, prompting him to run as far as he can to burn it off and go back to help. Charmy counts the survivors entering the shuttle, a demoralizing 36. Determined to save more, he races back to the girl trapped in the cars, despite Vector and Espio demanding him to return. As Charmy approaches the cage, he's swiped at, lowering his altitude, but before he can gain any distance, he's grabbed by a mob of Zombots and buried in the crowd below. As Sonic finally returns, the remaining Chaotix tell him about Charmy. Sonic motions them to return to the shuttle as he begins his search for the missing member, the issue ending on Vector and Espio shrouded in shadow, filled with worry and regret. What a fantastic issue, by far my favorite so far and easily one of the best in the arc, mainly for its use of rule number 2, perspective. So perspective is a thing everyone knows about. It's the different points of view which a story is told, and in this issue we get 3. The Chaotix, Amy at Restoration HQ, and Sonic. The use of perspective is again a cookie-cutter writing tool, but using it effectively can be tricky as you need to carefully plot out how much information the different characters know, how that info can affect each other, and the timeline of events. The importance of seeing Amy commanding at Restoration HQ is to both establish her dislike of the position and the fact that Restoration HQ has very little supplies left, making saving people incredibly difficult. Watching Sonic struggle to run off the virus and cope with the fact he can't help as many people as he'd like to gives us some insight into how big of a threat this is. And by far, most importantly, watching the Chaotix responding to the situation and evaluating the city shows how suddenly this virus can appear and the severity of the terrifying destruction it brings. All of these different viewpoints add so much depth to the story and give the audience such a great sense of how each character individually reacts to the situation. The last point is best seen through the zombification of Charmy. Sonic characters don't die. That's way too gruesome for the direction the series has taken over the last decade, and even in the case of Shadow or other characters who were implied to be dead, they were always off-screen or something like that, a more kid-friendly execution. Going with a literal zombie story is out of the question for Sonic because there is no way to kill characters without that being permanent, and it would simply be too violent for children. That's what makes the Zombot virus such a fantastic middle ground, as Ian Flynn can more or less kill any character he wants, but at the end of the day, once they succeed, everyone is fine. It is a genius idea for a Sonic story, and seeing it in action has been a complete delight. I cannot wait to see what happens next. As the story continues, we find ourselves in Floral Forest Village as Eggman releases more of the dangerous virus upon the unsuspecting town. Sonic is already in the field trying to minimize the damage and find Cream, who lives in the village. At the Rabbit household, Vanilla tells Cream to close the windows, but the tenacious child wants to do her best to help. But before Cream can join the fight, Vanilla puts a stop to her ambitions in an effort to protect her daughter, leading to the introduction of a long-unseen android, Gemerald. On the face ship, Eggman demands for the Zombots to pile atop Sonic, but to no avail. Cubot points out the gradual increase in unresponsiveness to commands, prompting Starline to ask Eggman how that's even possible. Eggman says that given the nature of the virus, it may have mutated its coding. Starline, shocked by this, angered Eggman when asking why he didn't account for this outcome. As Eggman storms off, Starline confides in Orbot, talking about how different his idol is in person whenever compared to his legendary reputation. Starline always assumed Sonic's unnatural strength was a formidable opponent no matter the circumstance, but seeing the Doctor at work, he's simply sloppy in execution. Orbot, in his typical sassy nature, actually admits that while yes, Sonic being so powerful often ends the Doctor's schemes, his ego and showboating does not help. Sonic continues his assault on the enemy, but with every attack on the Zombots, the infection spreads. But before he can run it off, Gemerald swoops in. A fight quickly erupts as in all truth, the heroic hedgehog is a very serious threat. Gemerald demands Sonic run off the virus before he can cause any more potential damage. I find it really cool how cutthroat Gemerald is. He's following orders to a T, and above all else, his goal is to protect Cream and her family, so even with Sonic's reputation, he's still infected, and that's all that matters to him. General goes back to launching his attack, but Cream compassionately reorders him that murder isn't okay and to not obliterate the Zombots. After all, he used to be evil too before Tails reprogrammed him. But no matter who built them or reprogrammed him, I just think that this is a really funny consistency that all the mechanical characters are so quick to murder, but we'll see that a little later. Despite the android's best efforts, the rabbit house is invaded. Cheese and Chocola sacrifice themselves to save their family. Vanilla carries Cream away as the young girl cries, screaming that they can't just leave their chow behind. Sonic bursts in and in a sweet, tender moment realizes just what a whirlwind Cream's mind must be in after losing her companions. He takes a moment to refocus her and remind her of her strength. After hearing those words, Cream grabs her mother and takes flight. In another standout moment from the story, Sonic sees the two flying away and says, "That kid's gonna grow up into someone amazing." Sonic and General do what they can to capture and stop the Zombots, but in the midst of the battle, Rouge calls Sonic. The spy tells him she's got intel that Eggman is about to strike Sunset City next, and Sonic races off. I hate putting a stop to the story so often, but very quickly I just want to talk about how much I appreciate the use of the extended cast of characters. I've said it before and I'll say it again, most Sonic characters are extremely one-note, mainly because they simply aren't given anything to do during a story in most games. It falls onto the core cast members and ones introduced for being in a specific story, which is why I am so grateful for Ian Flynn because he is actively going out of his way to give characters like the Chaotix, Cream, and General real character. He's not writing them based on their select few traits, but instead giving them fitting personalities that inform those traits, along with arcs that challenge them in new ways to truly show what they're made of. Over the course of this story, I now genuinely love and see the story potential for the entire extended cast of Sonic characters, as now each and every one of them feel like a real person. The Sunset City portion of this story is mainly just another high-stakes evacuation, so I'm going to be glossing over that aspect of this section to focus on the much larger character moments, and for those familiar with this issue, yeah, it's about Shadow. But before I get ahead of myself, Sonic rushes into the city, doing all he can to stop the zombie horde and clear a path with assistance from Omega. Sonic meets up with Rouge, who explains the state of the evacuation, as Sonic himself explains to her how Eggman is likely no longer able to control the Zombots. Once Sonic is made aware that Shadow is bringing transport for the survivors, Sonic replies he didn't know Shadow cared, which is dumb. Rouge justifies his decision, saying in Shadow's head that's just one less enemy to deal with, which is, again, dumb. As the fight continues, Shadow eventually arrives in a vehicle very reminiscent of the gun truck, which is a nice touch. But immediately he begins to point the finger at Sonic, blaming him for getting in the way of destroying, aka murdering Mr. Tinker when they had the chance, which again is so dumb. After Sonic raises the very reasonable defense that no one could have seen Starline coming out of nowhere, and he's infected too, but Shadow brushes it off as just a punishment for Sonic, which is insane. Shadow would never just be okay with Sonic's life being on the line, and now we reach likely the most infamous line of the entire IDW run: "Cowards run, I win." Shadow, under the baseless assumption that he, as the ultimate life form, can't be infected, begins to engage in hand-to-hand combat with the Zombot army. Sonic, as this is happening, runs off the virus, but he notices that he's actually started to feel winded. Even so, he rushes back to the city, but by the time he arrives, Shadow has been overwhelmed by the enemy, fully transformed into a Zombot. This is just so blatantly out of character for Shadow. The blatant disregard for life goes directly against one of the core aspects of his character. His total lack of caution, especially given his long-range abilities, is just idiotic, and we all know Shadow's not that stupid. And of course, even after being infected, he doesn't have the sense to run it off. This is only speculation, but I think because of the absurd Sega-issued mandates on Shadow's character, relegating him to a jerk, focusing only on his rivalry with Sonic, this led to Ian Flynn infecting him here. Now is out of character and this can't interfere with the story anymore, and when a writer understands Shadow as well as Ian Flynn does, I imagine writing him out of the story entirely was a pain to do. But all things considered, I do see why it was done, of course if my speculation is on the money. I personally don't enjoy this version of Shadow, and I think that writing him out of the story this early on was the right thing to do. Sonic and Shadow begin their clash, and luckily the virus has weakened the Ultimate Life Form to make him more manageable. After a spin dash kick, Shadow is more or less dealt with, so Rouge takes the survivors and speeds the transport out of there, with the cover of Sonic and Omega. The truck hasn't gained enough distance, but with the reappearance of Shadow and the massive Zombot horde, Sonic's infection is getting worse by the second and he needs to run it off. However, he won't leave Omega behind, to which the robot puts clear and cold as they are not friends. Sonic is just in the way of his massacre. I haven't put much focus on it here, but in this issue, Omega is back to being a sassy, blood-hungry weapon of mass destruction bent on destroying anything related to Eggman, and it's super fun to see again. Omega grabs and slams Shadow to the floor in an effort to subdue him, but he won't stop the counterattack as Shadow viciously tears Omega apart. It's such a shame that given the characterization Shadow has been forced into, within the context of the story, this moment does not hit that hard. But within the greater scope of Team Dark and everything the trio has gone through, I wish we got more of a reaction from Rouge, and Omega specifically, saying that their brother, their extremely close friend, their family, just tore one of their own apart. It's honestly heartbreaking stuff. As Sonic tries to retreat, he sees no path out. They're trapped. That is until Silver and Tails appear. Silver grabs the Horde, clearing a path for Sonic to burn off the virus, and Tails retrieves what remains of Omega. Later on, they regroup at Restoration HQ, where Cream fills Sonic in on the going-ons. The place is packed with survivors, and Sonic's friends desperately try to manage the situation. Gemerald is found guarding the entrance to the main office, but after some sassy banter, Sonic gets past. He fills in Rouge on what happened to Shadow, and we finally get an appropriate reaction to someone more or less dying from Team Dark as she storms off in anger and regret. I definitely want to put more focus on it later on, but over the course of the IDW comics, Rouge has quickly become one of my favorite Sonic characters. Her sassy, straight-to-business nature combined with her immense capability has genuinely made her one of the most interesting characters in the series so far, and I really want to see her in the stories more, really explored in depth. Especially in an emotional sense, because even as far back as Sonic 06, she's always been the most, emotionally vulnerable, open members of Team Dark, and I really think that is incredibly fascinating, and I'd love to see it more. Sonic and Amy don't get much time to chat, as she loses contact with several squadrons, sending her into a panic. Sonic leaves as to not be a distraction, and catches up with the Chaotix, who intend to capture Charmy and bring him here, which is frankly just a dumb idea, but it's not met with much resistance. Frankly, everyone seems too tired to argue. After heading to Tails' workstation, Sonic, Tails, and Silver make a plan to record data of Sonic running to see just how his speed combats the virus, while Tails tries to create a cure from his lab at Central City. That and Omega requesting to be rebuilt, to which Tails replies Eggman tech is really hard to replicate, which I do find fascinating world building, although Omega just suggests a simple jaw mechanism to bite Eggman's ankles off. And to close this issue, we see Starline researching in private on how to regain control of the Metal Virus, and in doing so, he stumbles upon the recorded events of the Lost World Project, and the electromagnetic controlling Zeddy on the Lost Hex. This story is just incredible. So far, the amount of thorough characterization and development to the underused characters is second to none. And although the main characters are being given such interesting stories and issues that challenge them in new ways. And most excitingly, we have so much more to cover. Never in my life did I think I'd give the Zeddy a chance, but if there's one person I trust to turn them into truly fearsome characters, it's Ian Flynn. When I first started writing this video, I assumed I'd end up with another two-parter like I did with the Metal Madness Saga. But lo and behold, here I am with a predicted three-parter, and although this process has been draining to say the least, and will likely continue to be, the fact we're getting Sonic stories of such fantastic quality pushing the boundaries of what a Sonic story can be makes it so incredibly exciting. I asked at the beginning of the video, what makes a great Sonic story? And the reason for doing so is because I wanted to bring to the forefront of this review and analysis that in my opinion, Ian Flynn, no, the entire IDW team working on this book is changing the definition before our very eyes, pushing the limits of Sonic storytelling, redefining how great Sonic stories can be. And with all that said, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I assure you that the next two parts will begin production immediately, so if you don't want to miss those, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. And if you want to see more content like this, be sure to go check out my old stuff and let me know what you'd like to see me cover. But just being upfront, this video is going to take a while to make. This script took a long while, the video editing process will hopefully be speedier. I got an editor because, frankly, I think that I'm not the best at this and I trust someone with a more professional touch, so I'm going to try to get these out as quickly as possible, but I'm not quite sure how quick that will be since I have other videos planned, but we'll see. I hope you stick around to see part 2 and 3 though. But with all the behind the scenes rambling out of the way, I'll see you all for the next chapter of the Metal Virus Saga.